Good morning. Yeah. Um, Jed always does this, so I'm gonna do it. So for those who are visiting, Jeff is gone. I'm Jacob, and I'm guest preaching here today. Jeff had to go to a wedding, I'm told. Um, so we are going to talk about football because training camp just started. You guys know. Training camp just started a couple days ago for the Seahawks. So football is just a couple short weeks away from preseason, and then September, and then all is well in the world again. That picture gets me pretty excited. But we're talking today about not being a fan and how that's going to work today. Now I have a story prepared to start this off, but I'm going to start with a little bit different story this morning as well, a little preface. Because when I agreed to do this sermon, Jeb is very organized and prepared, and he asked me to do this like 4 weeks ago, and I looked at my calendar, and I'm like, yes, there's nothing on that weekend. And then we got the gig for Highway 3 Band to play at Whaling Days. And you could call this story a sermon preparation, a story of procrastination, because I had been working on the slides and the sermon notes throughout the week, and normally Jeb gets them to Alice in a timely manner, and I'm not Jeb, so I didn't. And I was like, well, I'll just print them off at the office on Friday. I wasn't quite done on Friday. I'm like, well, I'll just print them off tomorrow when we're playing at Whaling Days. Now, if you were in Silverdale tomorrow or were attending our show, you remember the power went off, right? So the power completely shut off. So our entire show, all the electric guitars, the piano, all went down. So we finished our show acoustic, and I was like, it's no big deal. And we finished, and then I remembered that TSI has an electronic locking system, and I couldn't get into the office, which had my computer in it and my notes in it, and the printers, of course. And so I'm like, well, Dan's with me. He owns the building. Surely he can get in. And his key was actually in the office, in his safe in the office, which we're going to talk about a better a system for that. So I ended up hanging out in Silverdale for a few hours, and finally the power came back on, thankfully. And I would say I was able to print out my notes there, but the printers were still down and the Wi-Fi was down. And so don't procrastinate, teens. Going to college soon, don't procrastinate. Print stuff out ahead of time. Okay, so here we are. A man is being tailgated by a stressed out woman on a busy boulevard. Suddenly, the light turns yellow just in front of him. He did the right thing, stopping at the crosswalk, even though he could have beaten the red light by blasting through and going through the intersection. The tailgating woman was furious and honked her horn, screaming in frustration as she missed her chance to get through the intersection right behind him. She was still mid-rant when she heard a tap on her window and looked up to see the face of a very serious police officer. He ordered her to exit her car with her hands up. He handcuffed her and took her to the police station where she was searched, fingerprinted, and photographed and placed in a holding cell. After a couple of hours, the policeman approached the cell and opened the door, and she was escorted back to the booking desk, and the arresting officer was waiting for her with her personal effects. He said, "I'm very sorry for this mistake. You see, I pulled up behind your car, and you were blowing your horn and flipping off the guy in front of you and cussing a blue streak at him. And then I noticed the What Would Jesus Do sticker on the back, the Choose Life bumper sticker, the Follow Me to Sunday School bumper sticker, and the chrome-plated Jesus fish. And naturally, I assumed that you had stolen the car." My dad sent me that, actually, years ago. He sent me the anecdote, and he said, surely there's a sermon in there somewhere. And I think we're going to try to find out today. But it is estimated that 80% of drivers have experienced road rage or extreme anger in the last year. So I'm assuming that none of you good people are in that 80%. But we were talking about it with the teens one day, and the question came up, where for you is the hardest place to follow Jesus? And one of the first hands went up, like, while I'm driving. And I was like, amen, right? And it just seems like driving is one of those places where it's a real challenge. And we think, like, what would Jesus do if he was driving? Which led me to think, what would Jesus drive? I mean, I feel like Jesus, like, you remember that commercial, like the "You go, no, you go" Washington driver? I think Jesus would be that guy, like, "No, you go ahead," and the next car would come up and he'd be like, "Well, no, you go ahead." And then I'm trying to picture the situation, like, what would Jesus drive? And we don't need to guess, because in John 12 it said, "For I did not speak of my own accord." So Jesus drove a Honda, but he didn't like to talk about it. And likewise, the apostles, as they are followers of Jesus, in Acts 5:12 says the apostles were in one accord, so they obviously started carpooling in either his accord or they got a new one. And then, of course, we know that Moses rode a British motorcycle. The roar of Moses' triumph is heard in the hills. So I digress, though. That's I love that picture. I don't know. All right, but how hard is it to follow Jesus when we're behind the wheel? And the answer that we came up with in the teen class is that people are terrible drivers, and they can't hear you yelling. And I think those are valid. Those are valid points. It is hard to act like Jesus would while we are driving. What's not hard is to put a bunch of stickers on the back of our car. And that is different, but here's some of my favorites. I saw these while I was researching. It says, "In case of rapture, this car will be unmanned," which is fair. One of them is like, "Are you following Jesus this close?" Of course, I bet Jesus would have used his turn signals. You all probably have seen that one. And the most famous one, I think, is honk if you love Jesus, text and drive if you want to meet him. I'm sure that those are very impressive. But do these things make you a follower of Christ? These stickers are oftentimes right next to the Seattle Seahawks sticker and the Wagmore and Bark Less sticker that's on every Subaru, and the Apple stickers, which I thought came standard on a Prius, but I guess they don't. But they're right there with all of the other stickers that we put on our car. And so that's the question of the day is, are you a follower of Jesus? It's simple, right? It's simple enough. But I'm asking again, are you a follower of Jesus? Throughout this sermon, I want you guys to keep thinking about that question. And we're gonna talk about. I know it seems silly, right? You're in a church building. You're at church. A lot of you went to class. It seems like it's almost a rhetorical question, but we're gonna come back to it. If you're writing notes, good for you. Still have a pencil. If you're writing notes, just write that question, and we're gonna come back to it. But are you a follower of Jesus? So we're gonna be in John chapter 6. I thank you for reading the scripture. If you guys will open with me. And this is at a time when Jesus was, we'll say not the most popular. He had the most followers. That's like Twitter language, right? Instagram language. Jesus had the most followers at this time. It is estimated there was a crowd of around 5,000 that were following him around. And word had spread about his miraculous healings and his inspirational teaching. And after a full day of teaching, the crowd was gathered, and they were getting hungry. And I think you guys remember this story. And Jesus fed the 5,000. And it's interesting that, so he does that, and then they all kind of camp out for the night. So they didn't have to go back to town. They're out away from town a little bit by the lake. And you could argue he fed them so they could stay there to hear him teach some more, but I don't believe that's why he did it. But you guys know the story. He did the miracle. He took the fish and the loaves, and he fed the entire crowd, and there was even enough for leftovers. The scripture says they had their fill. But we're going to talk about the next day, because I think that's where the story that Jesus, that's where the teaching comes in that I think is why he fed them in the first place. So in verse 22, John chapter 6, it says, "The next day the crowd had stayed on the opposite shore of the lake and realized that only one boat had been there and that Jesus had not entered it with his disciples. That is not where I wanted to start in. 25, sorry. So they go find him. Here you go. So when they found him on the other side of the lake, they asked him, Rabbi, when did you get here? And Jesus answered, I tell you the truth, you are looking for me not because you saw miraculous signs, but because you ate loaves and had your fill. So he basically says, you're just coming to me to get breakfast, to get more food. Who here has ever gone to a party just for the food? I mean, right? I think I have. I mean, potluck works. Which reminds me, teens, August 12th, my house, there will be pizza. Actually, burgers. There'll be burgers and Doritos, so you should come. So food works to get people to come to stuff. If you have been to college, you know that anyone who's trying to get people to come to their cause, whatever it happens to be, they have a huge sign outside that says free pizza. You're like, ooh, I'm going to that, whatever it is. You can sit through some pretty interesting groups that way, but it works. And it's old as, the earth. You bring food and people will generally show up. But in my study for this, I found that Jesus fed the crowd so he could go on to his next teaching, which, as we will read, it says, you ate loaves and had your fill. Verse 27 says, do not work for food that spoils, but for food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. And on him God the Father has placed his seal. So he goes on to say, I am the only thing on the menu today. Me being here, Jesus being here, is the only thing on the menu today. There will be no more food. And we jump ahead. He goes on to teach about quite a bit, but we jump ahead to verse 66. And it says, from this time, many of his disciples turned back and no longer followed him. And it didn't really bother Jesus that these people left. He just goes on teaching. Jesus didn't really care how many followers he had. Right, guys? Teens? Jesus didn't care how many followers he had. So, but he did care about those that were really there for the right reasons. But what we find is that these people, for the sake of our sermon today, we're going to call them fans of Jesus. They were there not for Jesus himself, not to really hear his teaching, not because their heart really believed in who he was, but they were there simply maybe just for the food. Maybe they wanted to be a part of something. Maybe they wanted to be a part of the movement or a revolution or whatever, but there was no more free bread, and so they left. So we're going to call those guys fans of Jesus. They may have thought his teaching was nice. I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard it said that, well, I don't really believe Jesus is the Son of God, but he was a really good teacher. He had some really good points. My dad said that to me once. I'm like, well, he did say he was the Son of God, so that would make him a crazy person. If you don't believe that. But these people are just fans of Jesus. So for the sake of argument, we're going to say a fan is an enthusiastic admirer. So someone who is enthusiastically admiring something else. So I love sports. You guys know that. A lot of you know that about me. When my wife and I were first married, I was watching football one Sunday afternoon, and she's like, when does football end? And I was like, well, it ends in the beginning of February. And then I paused for a second. I'm like, but that's like the heart of basketball season. College basketball starts. And then she's like, well, when does that end? I'm like, well, the first week of April. And I was like, but then the NBA goes until the end of June. She's like, oh. And I was like, well, at least we'll have the summer. Oh, wait, no, the Sounders are playing in the summer, and then they play till October. But that doesn't matter because football starts again in September. And I get into it. I yell sometimes at the TV, which makes sense. She's laughing at me, and she laughs at me at the time. I clap sometimes. But it makes a difference. I'm pretty sure it makes a difference. But it does seem silly. And but I'm passionate about sports. I'm competitive. But we're putting it in the context of sports. But you could be a fan of a lot of different things. I am, an enthusiastic admirer of sports teams. bands, authors, movie directors, actors, a lot of stuff you could be a fan of. And that is an interesting concept because a few things I know about being a fan. A lot of it, being a fan, a lot of times is inherited. You may cheer for the same sports teams as your parents cheer for. Like, I'm a Kansas Jayhawks basketball fan. I've never lived in Kansas, but my dad was from Kansas. So that was inherited. And Harrison will be a Kansas Jayhawks fan as well. He already has a hat. Because I'm imposing that on him, just like it was imposed on me. And that's part of what it is. It is inherited. It's usually, some of it's something you may choose. But what does it mean to be a fan? And the question is today, how do I know if I'm a fan of Jesus or a follower of Jesus? And in any typical fashion, I know a lot of you guys have probably done this. Who here's gone on WebMD because you have a little strange symptom? You're trying to figure it out, and you type your symptom in, and 2 or 7 hours later, you find out you probably are dying of some, communicable disease or a brain-eating amoeba or or something worse. But WebMD is we try to self-diagnose. And so that's what we're going to do this morning in that spirit. We're going to try to diagnose whether we are a fan of Jesus or whether we are a true follower of Jesus. So since we love quizzes and lists and stuff, I present the following questions. So the first one, have you made a decision for Jesus or have you committed to Jesus? The second one, do you just know about Jesus or do you really know him? And the third one, are you far more focused on the outside or on the inside? So let's go to the next slide if we can. John. Ooh, blank. One more. One more slide. Thank you. Okay. So our first one, have you made a decision or a commitment? In an ideal world, those would be the same thing. Saying, I have decided to follow Jesus. And that should be the same as I'm committing to following Jesus. But oftentimes, those are not the same thing. A decision is saying, I want to run a marathon this year. That's a nice decision, right? A commitment is forking over the money to register for the race with some friends to give you some accountability and buying a treadmill. I can tell you from experience, there's a lot of used treadmills on Craigslist. We just got one, and the lady's like, there might be 20 miles on it, ish. I was like, oh, okay, cool. So a decision is saying you want to lose 20 pounds this year. A commitment is getting a gym membership, tossing out the Oreos and Doritos, and actually going. So that's the difference. So we're going to be in John chapter 3, and we're going to look at the story of a man who was a fan of Jesus. His name is Nicodemus. Many of you may remember this story, but he was an important man in the Jewish community. He was a Pharisee, a member of the Sanhedrin, and he had become an admirer of Jesus. His entire life, his work, his friends and family were all tied up in his religion and his participation in the Sanhedrin. So he was respected, he was important. So as we look at John chapter 3, it says in verse 1, it says, now there was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a member of the Jewish ruling council. He came to Jesus at night and said, and we're going to stop there, because the fact is he came to Jesus at night, which means that he was afraid, possibly, of coming to talk to Jesus during the day. He was afraid, possibly, of who saw him talking to Jesus. He at night, he doesn't have to worry about another member of the Sanhedrin seeing him, or their wife, or their kids. He didn't have to worry about anything going to see Jesus at night. If he had gone to see Jesus in the day, he would have had to worry about his job security, his respect that he had earned. He'd have to worry about all of those things. So he came and saw Jesus at night. Now, we find out that it says in verse 2, he came to see Jesus at night. He said, Rabbi, we know that you are he who has come from God. So we find out that Nicodemus believes that Jesus has come from God. So Nicodemus is an admirer of Jesus. He believes that Jesus is from God, but he isn't committed to making the leap to actually start following Jesus. He isn't committed to going and seeing Jesus during the daytime. He's still trying to hide it. So making a decision is not the same thing as following. In John chapter 7, verse 51, we come back to Nicodemus, and this time he's in the Sanhedrin, and they're arguing about Jesus, who he is, and why. One of the guys comes in and he starts talking about why didn't they bring Jesus in? And in John chapter 7, verse 51, he says, "Does our law condemn any man without first hearing him to find out what he's been doing?" And they replied, "Are you from Galilee too?" So what happened here was Nicodemus stood up in the council and said, "Does our law condemn him without hearing him?" So he's standing up for Jesus, saying, well, first we ought to hear this guy out before he's just brought in. And they replied, "Are you from Galilee too?" Which is a burn, I guess, in their time. Being from Galilee is it's kind of like Nowheresville. In their mind, like, nothing good came out of Galilee. Nothing important came out of Galilee. And so when they say, "Are you from Galilee too?" they're disrespecting him. They're kind of knocking him. And this is a gut check time for Nicodemus. Does he want to risk his reputation? Does he want to risk his life? Does he want to risk his career for this Jesus guy? So there's usually a moment like this for all believers. A moment when you're forced to decide between being a fan and a follower. We find out at the end of John's gospel, there's one brief reference to Nicodemus. Jesus has been crucified, and his body is being prepared for burial. And we read that Nicodemus brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds, to help prepare the body. And this would have been a costly gesture. It would have been expensive. But more than that, he wouldn't have been able to hide going to buy all this stuff and bringing it to where Jesus' body was from all his friends. He wouldn't be able to hide it from his family or anybody else. This was Nicodemus finally stepping out of being a fan of Jesus secretly by himself to being a follower of Jesus. So following Jesus ended up costing Nicodemus everything. I'm going to go ahead and assume that he lost his place in the Sanhedrin and that he lost his respect in the community, and it cost him a lot. Tradition holds that Nicodemus was martyred sometime in the 1st century for his beliefs. I can't confirm that as fact, but what I can say is that we know that it cost Nicodemus everything. So a question is, what has your relationship with Jesus cost you? It's not rhetorical. You can write it down. What has it cost you? If it hasn't cost you anything, ask yourself why not. There will be a cost. There is no forgiveness without repentance. There is no salvation without surrender. And there is no life without death. And there's no believing without committing. All right. Here we go. Slide, if you would, John. Slide. Yeah, one more. Maybe. All right. So secondly, do you know Jesus? Know about Jesus? Or do you know Jesus? Fans are pretty good with factual knowledge. I know Brian, and probably Brad, can name every starter on the Seahawks. You may even know where they went to college. There was a show on ESPN for a while called Stump the Schwab. Has anyone seen that? And this guy was the most factually knowledge. He had the most knowledge about sports of any person that I've ever seen or met. And the whole show is built around trying to beat him. And the questions were similar to who was the starting second baseman in the 1928 World Series? And it's and he would know the entire roster of every baseball team of every year, who played, who got hurt. It was ridiculous. He knew everything, but he wasn't athletic, we'll say. He knew about sports. I I don't think he ever played sports. Um, so you may know everything there is to know about Russell Wilson or Taylor Swift, but do you know them? And that's the difference here. Fans mistake knowledge for intimacy. I'm sure every famous person has a story of somebody coming up to them saying, "Oh, hey, I know everything about you. Our birthday's on the same day, and we would totally be friends in real life." And then they call their security. And because knowledge is not the same as intimacy. Knowing about Russell Wilson's not the same as knowing Russell Wilson. So in the Bible, the best word for know that we have is the word yada. Now, if you've seen Seinfeld, older ones, if you've seen Seinfeld, you have an idea of where that verse came from, but it says the word for intimacy is the word know, and is the word yada, and the Hebrew definition of the word is to know and to be fully known. It was first used in Genesis, and it says Adam knew his wife Eve. He yada'd his wife Eve. And the NIV took it a step further and said Adam lay with his wife Eve. So if that gives you an idea of how much that is not just factual knowledge, it is to know completely and be known completely. And it's used throughout the Bible. And it's a Hebrew scholar defines the word as a mingling of the souls, which is really awesome and poetic. But that sounds a lot like it's more than winning a Bible bowl, does it not? David uses this word. If you'll turn to Psalm 139 with me here. Psalms, a lot of Psalms. In Psalm 139, David uses it. He says, "O Lord, you have searched me and you know me. You yada me. When you know when I sit and when I rise, you perceive my thoughts from afar." So this knowledge is not factual knowledge. I mean, it may include that. Learning about Jesus is fantastic. But knowing about Jesus is not the same as knowing him. Knowing facts does not equate to intimacy or relationship. Being a Bible Bowl champion is nice, but Jesus wants followers to know and to be known by him. So that's the second question. Do you know about Jesus, or do you know him? To let him know you. Next one, John, if you would. One more. All right. The next one is, are you more focused on the outside than on the inside? We'll be in Matthew 23, if you'll turn over there. This is the classic woe to you sermon, which is Jesus talking to the Pharisees. And many of you are familiar with the story, but he seems especially harsh to these religious guys. And let's see. So Matthew 23:5 says, everything they do is done for people to see. When we think about what we do for Jesus, what we do for the church, what we do for those around us, are we just doing it for people to see it? I mean, I think we all know somebody who posts every good deed they do on Facebook or Instagram or Snapface, whatever. But if Jesus were giving this woe to you sermon today to the modern guy, he might sound like something like this. Woe to you, those who won't go to an R-rated movie in the theater but have some at home on your DVR. Woe to you who feed the hungry and help the needy and then make sure you tell everybody about it for the next 2 weeks. Woe to you who make sure people see you put an offering in on the tray on Sunday morning but haven't considered reaching out to their neighbor or friend who lost their job and can't pay their bills. Woe to you who keep their eye on the failures of their brothers and sisters so you look like a better Christian than them. Jesus is as harsh with these religious fellows as he is tender and encouraging to those who've truly committed their heart to him. In Matthew 23:27, Jesus says, "You are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of dead men's bones and everything unclean. In the same way, on the outside you appear to people as righteous, but on the inside you are full of hypocrisy. So if you're a true follower, you have to be perfect, right? No, I mean, you can't be perfect. We're not going to be perfect, but you have to be authentic. See the difference? You have to be authentic. All right, so those are the symptoms of fandom. There are more. But am I a fan of Jesus? Before we... All right, so that's the question. That's the most important question that we can ask is, am I a true follower of Jesus? The stakes are high. The scariest verse in the Bible to me, and always has been, is in Matthew 7:21 through 23. It says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only he who does the will of my Father who's in heaven. Many will come to me and say on that day, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and perform many miracles?' Then I will tell them plainly, 'I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers.'" That's scary. That should be scary. I don't know about you guys, but I've never cast out any demons, unless you count getting your 2-year-old to stop throwing a fit in Target. Sometimes I think that would count. I haven't performed any miracles, unless you count getting 3 kids to church on time for class. I think that could count, but I haven't done these things which sound really like awesome. Like if you had performed miracles for God, you would think, I'm definitely in. I'm in heaven. I performed miracles for God. But Jesus is going to tell those people that I didn't know you. So fans will say on that day, did I not go to church in your name and sing songs in your name? Did I not go to Bible class more than most people and read the Bible? Did I not learn about you and memorize the Judges song and the books of the Bible song? Did I not teach class in your name? Help in the nursery in your name? Did I not make green bean casserole for potluck in your name? Did I not attend camps, retreats, mission trips? Did I not wear my Christian shirts to school and have a Jesus fish on my car? Did I not teach youth group in your name? And Jesus could say to each one of us, I never knew you. And that's scary. And I think as we look at it, I hope we're starting to get the picture that that you could do a lot of great things in the name of God, but unless you know Jesus in a relationship, unless he knows you, what are we doing? So there appears to be a disconnect. We a lot of times we're misunderstanding what it means to be a disciple or a follower of Jesus. I asked the teens one day, what are some things that you do to spread the gospel? What are some things that you do to tell people about Jesus? And one of the first ones I got is that, like, I wear my Christian shirt, right? This is from this year's camp. I wear that at school. And so people know that I'm a fan, or I follow Jesus. But the next day you wear this one. Right? Same idea, same message, like, support this guy. And the two things are very similar. Same thing with the stickers. You know, you could have your sticker on your car saying, follow me to Bible school. And then you could have your other sticker saying, I support the Seattle Seahawks. So what message are we sending? All right, we're going to look at 2 verses. One of them is common at sporting events. So I want you to finish this first one for me. For God so loved the world that he believes. Yeah, I heard it over there. Nailed it. All right. We all know that verse, right? God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish, but have everlasting life. And that is a fantastic verse. In the 70s, sometime in the 70s, a man started making signs for sporting events, and he found that if he held up that big sign, they always put him on TV. So then other people started doing it, and it kind of became a thing. If you've seen a sporting event, chances are you've seen a John 3:16 sign. That's all it says. Or maybe on the black tape on a football player's face. Sometimes they put it on there. So when the camera zooms in, and that's great. It is a very succinct single scripture which basically sums up the story of Jesus in the New Testament. And the message is it's a good sell for Christianity, and I mean that in the best way. It's basically saying all I have to do is believe and I get to go to heaven. That is sweet. Let's see if we can finish this one. Luke 9:23. If anyone would come after me, he must take up his cross. Right, deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. That one's not as well known. That one is not as happy, I guess. It's not as good of a sell for Christianity. And you won't see it at a sporting event. But that's in 3 of the Gospels, that verse. And it just doesn't sound as appealing, because if you think about, if we just take the part of the take up the cross part out, let's just take that out, and just, the first part, it says deny yourself. Well, already we don't like that verse, because that goes against our nature, and it goes against our culture. For one, our culture is telling us, you need to have everything that we want to sell you, and you won't be happy until you do. You need the iPhone 7. You need the whoever, the new car, the new Accord. But if I want to come after Jesus, I must deny myself and take up my cross daily. Those are the 2 requirements. So what does that look like? And what does that mean? In Matthew 19, if you turn over with me. Let's see. In Matthew 19, we come across, in verse 16, a man whose name we don't know, but is simply referred to as the rich young ruler, which is an awesome title, right? He's young, he's rich. Yes, cool. Verse 16 says, he asked Jesus, "Teacher, what good thing must I do to get eternal life?" But as you might remember, Jesus goes on in verse 21 to say, he says, "If you want to be perfect, go sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come and follow me." And a lot of people have used this verse to talk about money, to talk about what it means to follow. But this verse is more about following Jesus than it is about the money. It just happened that was that guy's number one thing. That was his thing he was holding on to. We don't know his name because, as you may remember, he chose to keep his stuff. Jesus put him at a crossroads, and he had to say, "Yes, I will follow you, Jesus," or "Yes, I will keep my stuff." And he chose his stuff. So Luke 9 says, "Deny ourselves, take up our cross, and follow him." But we avoided it, and now we have to talk about it, is the cross. And quite simply, the cross is death. To take up your cross is like your dead man walking, okay? And it is death row. As soon as someone sees you carrying a cross, you're dead. And that is it is humiliating. The Romans had many ways to kill you. They usually picked the cheapest way, unless they were trying to make a point. If they were trying to make a point, they would put you on a cross to humiliate you and to tell other people, don't do what that guy was doing. So the significance of someone carrying a cross is that they were dead. So Jesus' invitation in Luke 9 is summed up in the following catchphrase, "Come and die." We'll put that on a billboard for Christianity. Come and die. Definitely not as appealing as John 3:16. But equally as important. There is no carrying a cross without suffering. If you need to read the account of when Jesus was crucified, it's the basic is the definition of suffering. So you can't carry a cross without suffering, which leads me to there's a lot of junk theology out there in our culture that if things are not going well in your life and you're experiencing some sort of pain and suffering, that clearly you're not close enough to God, or clearly you're not praying enough about it. And it's simply not true. That's health and wellness gospel, and it's not true. Because truly following Jesus is suffering. It is denying yourself. I was talking with Jeb in preparation for this, and we started talking about suffering, and I mentioned type 1 and type 2 fun. And I don't know if you guys have heard that, but type 1 fun is something that is fun while you're doing it. Like, playing Pokemon Go, I guess. Or, playing basketball, something like that. Anything that you find fun while you're doing it. Type 2 fun is something that is terrible while you were doing it, but really rewarding, and you look back fondly at it like, that was awesome. Anyone that's run a long race or climbed a mountain, and especially with people, with friends, like you suffer, but because you suffer together, there's like you bond, and you look back and you're like, we should do that again, because you don't remember how terrible it was the last time you did it. So that I say that to say that the suffering sounds bad on its surface, but we'll find out it's actually good for us. But here's the funny thing. So, come and die is not a great slogan, but I want you guys to think about being dead for a minute. I know, fun, right? Think about being dead. No one likes to think about being dead. But here's the funny thing about dead people. Dead people do not care what other people think of them. Dead people do not care how nice their clothes are or what kind of car they have. They aren't caught up with how much money's in their bank account. Dead people, being dead is the ultimate surrender of everything you have and everything that you are. When you are dead, you are no longer concerned with your life, which makes sense. So that's what Jesus is asking us to do. He says, come, suffer with me, deny yourself, and die with me. And that's a tough message, but that's what he's asking us. A true follower will suffer, and a true follower will die. And that is tough. That's tough for us. So how shall we respond to such an invitation? Here are some ideas. All right. I call these the W words in class. This is wherever. So in Luke 9:57, we come across, actually, let me turn there real fast. In Luke 9:57, in my Bible, has like the titles over the little chapters. This one's called The Cost of Following Jesus, which makes sense, and I think it's on par. It says the cost of following Jesus. So in verse 57, it says, as they were walking along the road, a man said to him, I will follow you wherever you go. Jesus replied, foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. So in Luke 9, this man uses a very general statement. I'll follow you wherever you go. Sounds fantastic. But Jesus says, I'm homeless. I'm moving around. You need to be sure what you know that what you're saying. And the wherever could be wherever. In the book that this class was based on, he talks about a lot of different places that are unpleasant to be, where people have gone on mission, often isolated, at their own peril. The wherever could be wherever. And I say that to say, instead of saying a general, I will follow Jesus wherever, start throwing a specific word in there. I will follow Jesus when I'm at work. I will follow Jesus in my school. I will follow Jesus to Tuba City. I will follow Jesus to Nicaragua. I don't know. You will follow Jesus wherever. Jesus may call you to go on mission for a week, a year, or the rest of your life. Following is saying yes to these things before you know where Jesus is going to call you to go. There's a woman named Rachel Starr who, I'm going to read her story real quick. It says, as a girl raised in a Christian home, I never went inside a strip club in my life. I felt like the calling was from God to reach out to women in this industry. I didn't know how I was going to do this, but I knew that God had given me the passion for these women to know how much He loves them and how precious they are in His eyes. Still, I was definitely nervous to share this idea with others. I mean, that isn't exactly a typical experience for a church-raised girl. But whatever my doubts, I knew God was going to call me to take action. He wanted more out of me than just to have feelings and compassion for women in this industry. He wanted me to do something about it. In 2008, I started Scarlet Hope, a ministry that reaches out to women in this industry. We take big Southern comfort-style dinners to strip clubs. And they actually go in the back and help with the girls' hair while the girls are getting ready, and they spend that time talking with them. And they've gotten a number of them to come to church, and they've gotten them to share and to open up about our life. And she finishes her letter saying, my name is Rachel Starr, and I'm not a fan. So the wherever could be wherever. Are you comfortable with that? Go ahead and give me a slide, John. Next is whenever. So if we keep reading along, it says, the man he said to another man, follow me. This man replied, Lord, first let me go and bury my father. Jesus said to him, let the dead bury their own dead. This always seemed really harsh to me. Like the man's father just died, and you're saying let the dead bury their own dead. But in my study, I found that what he actually meant was let me wait till my parents die. And that's a more accurate translation of let me go bury my father. Now that makes more sense. Maybe his father didn't want him, wouldn't approve of him going with Jesus. Maybe his father wanted him to take over the family business, or perhaps he was waiting for his inheritance. But the simple fact is the guy was like, well, let me go do this first. And we don't really know the reason why this man wanted to wait, but Jesus quite plainly states that following him is more important than that. When you use your computer or your cell phone for directions, it always asks from your current location or from a different location. Jesus is calling us. He's calling you to follow him right now from your current location, not from some future time. We always put things off in such a way like, well, I would love to go on the mission trip this year, but let me wait until I know a little bit more of the Bible so I could accurately teach it to somebody. Or let me wait till I'm out of school. I mean, I would find time to read the Bible, but let me wait till I'm out of college because I have so much other reading to do. It's easy to get caught up in this, but wait until. Jesus is calling us to follow him now, like right now, from where you are right now. It doesn't matter where you are in your faith. He's calling you to follow him from this spot. And that's what's important here. Can you hit the slide, John? And the next is whatever. Luke 9:61 says, still another man said, I will follow you, Lord, but first let me go back and say goodbye to my family. Now this guy obviously didn't hear the guy in front of him because it's very similar. It says, no one who puts a hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the service, the kingdom of God. And that's very similar story to the other one, but the idea is very similar in that he uses this analogy about a plow. And in this day, and obviously still today, plowing is a lot of work. So no one who puts his hand to the plow, so no one who's working and looks back is fit for the service of the kingdom of God. So he wants you to be a windshield person. He wants you to look ahead and look what his plan is for you. He doesn't want you to look back at your old life. And we have a great example in 1 Kings 19. You can turn there if you want, but it's when Elijah calls Elisha to be the next prophet. And Elisha is plowing a field with his 12 yoke of oxen, which means that Elisha is rich, okay? He's doing very well for himself if he has 12 yoke of oxen. But when he's called to be a prophet, Elisha, he slaughters his oxen and gathers all his plows and sets them on fire, and then cooks the oxen on the fire and feeds it to everybody on his farm, and then he follows. And that's what Jesus is looking for when he follows you. You don't have to go burn your house down, but he wants you to take your old life and toss it. As a contrast to all these guys that are saying, but wait, we all remember that the way that the disciples were called, Jesus says, follow me, and they're like, okay. And it's always been crazy to me to think, and I ask the teens, like, if Jesus walked into, I was going to say your house, but they don't own houses. I'm like, if you walked into your room and said, follow me, and then we decided it was creepy, but like if he walked into your room, but the idea is the same. If Jesus walked into your house and said, follow me, would you? And that question has always rattled around in my brain. But the whatever also applies to whatever in your life. So a lot of this has been about surrender. When we talk about denying ourselves, would you surrender everything in your life to Jesus? And I think a lot of times we hold stuff back. We compartmentalize. I'll surrender my Sunday morning and I'll surrender my Wednesday night. I'm not going to surrender my Friday night though. Or I'll surrender, certain parts, but I'm not going to surrender the type of movies I watch or the books I read. There was this interesting practice with the Knights Templar. When they were baptized, they would hold their sword out of the water, which is strange. But what they were basically saying was that you can have all of me, Jesus, except this sword because of what I do with it. So what are you holding out of the water? Is it the remote control or your wallet? Is it something else? Is it your car? Is it a house? What are something that you're holding out? There was a man who was a multimillionaire by the time he was 29. He tried to get his wife anything and everything that she could want. One day he came home to a note saying that she was leaving him. He chased after her and caught up with her in New York, and she told him that the things that people said were supposed to make her happy were leaving her empty, and that he was working too much, and that she just felt she was done with the whole thing. They talked about it through the night, and the next day they went to a church and decided to give away their fortune and dedicate themselves to serving the poor. They told the minister of that church at the time that this was what they were going to do, and even he said, I don't think that move is exactly necessary. I don't think it's entirely necessary, but they insisted. He and his wife surrendered everything, their life to Jesus, and started a mission called Habitat for Humanity. His name is Millard Fuller, and his wife's name is Linda, and they are not fans. So the question of the day is, are you a fan or a follower? I hope you've put some time into thinking about that, and continue to think about it through the weeks and the months that come, because it is that important. Everything is riding on whether you are truly following Jesus or whether you are merely a fan of Jesus. The one thing that I know about being a fan is that it doesn't require much sacrifice. If you're a fan of the Seattle Seahawks, a jersey will run you $100. Season tickets will run you a little bit more than that, but you could watch from home. You could watch on basic television. It doesn't cost you anything. You spend 3 hours on your Sunday watching a football game. That's time investment is really the only cost. It's very simple. So if you look at your relationship with Jesus right now and it's not costing you something, that's a question that you should ask, because it should be. Following Jesus costs us something. In fact, following Jesus costs us everything. One of my favorite expressions that the Jews had about following a rabbi was that they wanted to be in the dust of the rabbi. And it's a great way to to visualize following so closely that you're getting dirty. But I like the analogy even more because following Jesus, you are going to get your hands dirty. As a fan, you can sit back in your nice chair in your stadium and just watch the thing take place, watch the game take place. But as a follower, you have to get in there. Yeah, good. So I hope you guys think about that, and I hope that this morning and the coming weeks we'll decide to be followers, because Jesus does not want fans. If you were touched this morning by the message, you come to the front as we stand and sing. The elders will be here to talk with you.